Here's something most Canadians don't know. There's a Canadian territory with fewer people than many towns, sitting on resources worth tens of billions of dollars, and positioned on Canada's western Arctic flank, near the Pacific Arctic Gateway that could become one of the most valuable choke points on Earth. A frozen wilderness in Canada's far northwest that many people only know from a Jack London novel or a Robert Service poem. This territory has a population of about 47,500 people. That's less than a single neighborhood in Toronto and less than most Canadian suburbs. But here's what nobody talks about. This territory borders Alaska, right next to the North America-Asia corridor defined by the Bering Strait. As Arctic ice melts, shipping routes that were impossible for thousands of years are opening up. And this place sits on Canada's Alaska border, facing the Arctic Ocean. Beneath its mountains lie some of the richest mineral deposits in North America: gold, silver, copper, zinc, and rare earth elements that power modern technology. And it sits on the edge of Alaska, the Arctic Ocean, and a trade story that could define the 21st century. For over a century, this territory has been seen as a frozen frontier, a place of gold rush history and wilderness tourism. But geography is about to change everything. Because what's buried beneath its mountains, what flows through its waters, and what's opening in the Arctic Ocean could reshape Canada's economy and shift power in the North Pacific. This is Yukon, the gateway that could reshape Canada's economy. Let's start with just how remote Yukon really is. The territory covers 482,443 square kilometers. That's larger than California, bigger than Germany, about the size of Spain. But it has a population of about 47,500 people. That's 0.10 people per square kilometer, one of the lowest population densities in Canada. And most of those people live in one place, Whitehorse, the capital. Population about 28,000, according to 2021 census. That means roughly 60% of Yukon's entire population lives in a single small city. The rest? Wilderness, mountains, forests, rivers, and a handful of tiny communities scattered across an area the size of a European country. Dawson City, famous from the Klondike Gold Rush, has a population of about 2,410. Old Crow, the northernmost community, has 240 people. There are only a few major routes that do most of the connecting: the Alaska Highway, the Klondike Highway, the Dempster Highway, which is gravel and only passable part of the year. From the outside, Yukon looks like a forgotten corner of Canada. But this perception misses something critical, because Yukon's geography, the same geography that kept it isolated for centuries, is about to become its greatest advantage. Yukon borders Alaska and touches the Beaufort Sea, and it sits one step from the Bering Strait, the corridor linking the Pacific and the Arctic. For thousands of years, this location meant nothing. But that's changing. Arctic ice is melting. Shipping routes that were impassable are opening. Yukon is positioned to feed and service that Pacific Arctic gateway from Canada's side. But before we get to the future, we need to understand what's already here. Because buried beneath Yukon's mountains is wealth that most Canadians don't even know exists. Yukon's story begins with gold. In 1896, gold was discovered in Bonanza Creek, a tributary of the Klondike River near what would become Dawson City. What followed was one of the greatest gold rushes in history. Over 100,000 people attempted the journey to the Klondike. About 30,000 made it. From 1896 to 1899 alone, over $29 million in gold was pulled from the ground around Dawson, roughly around $1 billion in today's money depending on the measure. But here's what most people don't know. The gold never stopped. Yukon is still one of Canada's gold producers. Modern mines extract hundreds of thousands of ounces using techniques the stampeders of 1898 couldn't have imagined. But gold is just the beginning. Silver, copper, zinc, and lead. The Faro mine, which operated from 1969 to 1998, was one of the largest open-pit lead-zinc mines in the world. It produced approximately 70 million tons of zinc and lead concentrate. Today, new deposits are being discovered regularly. The Mactung tungsten deposit in eastern Yukon is one of the largest tungsten deposits on Earth. Rare earth elements. Remember those elements that China controls 80% of global production? The ones essential for smartphones, electric vehicles, and military technology? Yukon has them. The Nechalacho Rare Earth Project near the Northwest Territories border contains significant deposits of heavy rare earths, the most valuable and strategically important type. As the world tries to reduce dependence on Chinese rare earths, Yukon's deposits become critically important. Critical minerals for batteries. Yukon has reasonable deposits of lithium, cobalt, nickel, and graphite, all essential for electric vehicle batteries. The Yukon government has identified over 20 critical mineral projects in various stages of exploration and development. But here's the challenge: extraction. Yukon's mineral wealth is trapped by geography. The territory is remote, infrastructure is limited, road access is limited, and from BC there are essentially two main routes into Yukon: Alaska Highway and Highway 37, Stewart-Cassiar, which makes heavy logistics expensive. Getting equipment in is expensive. Getting minerals out is even more expensive. Some mines operate seasonally. Winter conditions make construction and transportation incredibly difficult, and environmental regulations are strict. Yukon has vast wilderness areas that are protected. Indigenous communities have land claims that must be respected. Mining is a major pillar of the economy, contributing hundreds of millions of dollars a year and roughly high single digits to around 10% of GDP in recent data. For a population of about 47,500, that's significant. And as global demand for critical minerals increases, Yukon's deposits become more valuable. But minerals are only part of the story. Because Yukon's real strategic value isn't what's beneath the ground, it's what's opening in the ocean to the north. For thousands of years, the Arctic Ocean was impassable, frozen solid for most of the year. A barrier, not a route. But climate change is rewriting the rules. Arctic sea ice is shrinking fast and the navigation season is changing. The Northwest Passage, the sea route through Canada's Arctic archipelago connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, is becoming navigable. Yukon sits near the Beaufort Sea end of Canada's Arctic, close to the Pacific approach via the Bering Strait. Here's why this matters. Look at a globe, not a flat map, a globe. The shortest route from Asia to Europe runs through the Arctic Ocean. A ship traveling from Shanghai to Rotterdam via the Suez Canal covers about 20,000 kilometers and takes roughly 34 days. The same journey via the Northwest Passage? About 14,000 kilometers and 20 days. That's a 6,000 kilometer shortcut. 2 weeks saved. Millions in fuel costs eliminated. It can bypass choke points like Suez and avoid bottlenecks like Malacca, depending on route and season. For global shipping, this is transformative. But here's where Yukon comes in. One of the Pacific gateways into the Arctic is the Bering Strait. From there, ships move into the Beaufort Sea, along Canada's northern edge, where Yukon meets the Arctic, before pushing east toward the Canadian Arctic routes. Refueling stations. Ships can't make the entire Arctic journey on a single tank. They need to refuel. Resupply ports, emergency supplies, spare parts, provisions, search and rescue facilities. The Arctic is still dangerous. Ice conditions change rapidly. Ships get stuck. People need rescue, navigation support, real-time ice monitoring, weather forecasting, route planning. Right now, this infrastructure barely exists. But as Arctic shipping increases, it will become essential. And Yukon is positioned to provide it. The port of Tuktoyaktuk in the Northwest Territories is the closest port to Yukon. But shallow approaches limit the size of vessels it can reliably serve. But Yukon could develop its own Arctic port facilities. The economic potential is enormous. Every ship that passes through could generate revenue through port fees, refueling, resupply, and services. But there's another strategic factor: Alaska. Yukon shares a 1,210-kilometer border with Alaska. The Alaska Highway runs through Yukon, connecting Alaska to the rest of North America. Alaska is critical to U.S. military strategy in the Pacific. It's home to major military bases, early warning systems, and strategic missile defense. And the only land route connecting Alaska to the continental United States runs through Yukon. This makes Yukon strategically important not just to Canada, but to the United States. As Arctic shipping increases and geopolitical tensions rise in the North Pacific, Yukon's location becomes more valuable. But location alone isn't enough. To capitalize on this geography, Yukon needs infrastructure. And that's the challenge. Here's Yukon's fundamental problem. It has resources worth billions. It sits in a strategic spot, but it doesn't yet have enough infrastructure to capitalize on any of it. Transportation. Yukon isn't roadless, but only a handful of corridors do most of the connecting. The Alaska Highway, Highway 1, is the main spine. The Klondike Highway System, Highway 2, ties Whitehorse to Dawson City and links towards Skagway. The Haines Road, Highway 3, is another tidewater outlet. And the Dempster Highway, Highway 5, runs north toward Inuvik, mostly gravel, seasonally constrained. From there, the Inuvik-Tuktoyaktuk Highway reaches the Beaufort Sea. Rail exists, the White Pass and Yukon route, but it's isolated and primarily tourism, not a freight backbone connected to Canada's network. So major projects still face a truck and air reality and expensive logistics. Ports. Yukon has no seaports. Skagway. Alaska serves as Yukon's primary ocean access, but it's in another country. Developing Arctic port facilities would cost billions and require year-round icebreaker support. Energy. Most of Yukon's electricity comes from hydroelectric dams on the Yukon River, but capacity is limited. Large-scale mining operations require enormous amounts of power. Expanding energy infrastructure is expensive and environmentally sensitive. Population. With just 47,500 people, Yukon has a tiny labor force. Most large projects require flying in workers from southern Canada. This creates a fly-in, fly-out economy. Workers don't settle permanently. Communities don't grow. Climate. Yukon's climate is extreme. Winter temperatures regularly drop to -40 degrees Celsius or colder. Construction is only possible during short summer months. Permafrost makes building foundations difficult. Roads buckle as ground freezes and thaws. Indigenous land claims. Much of Yukon is covered by land claim agreements with First Nations. Any development requires consultation and consent. This isn't a barrier, it's a legal and moral requirement, but it adds time and complexity to every project. So Yukon faces a paradox. It has enormous potential, but realizing that potential requires massive infrastructure investment. And infrastructure investment is hard to justify with such a small population and remote location. But things are starting to change. Here's what's changing the calculation for Yukon. Arctic geopolitics. The Arctic is no longer a frozen wasteland. It's becoming a contested space. Russia is building military bases along its Arctic coast. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state and is investing billions in Arctic shipping and resource extraction. The United States is expanding military infrastructure in Alaska and increasing Arctic patrols. Canada is scrambling to assert sovereignty over its Arctic territory. And Yukon sits right in the middle of this. As Arctic shipping routes open, Yukon's location becomes strategically critical, not just economically, but militarily. Critical minerals. The global race for critical minerals is intensifying. Electric vehicles, renewable energy, advanced weapon systems, all require minerals that are concentrated in a few places. China currently dominates critical mineral supply chains. Western countries are desperate to diversify. Yukon has lithium, cobalt, rare earths, tungsten, and other critical minerals. As demand increases, these deposits become more valuable. Climate change. As Arctic ice melts, resources that were inaccessible become reachable. Shipping routes that were impossible become viable. Yukon is positioned to benefit from this shift more than almost any other region in Canada. Infrastructure investment. The Canadian government is starting to invest. The Yukon Resource Gateway project is upgrading roads to mining sites. New energy projects are being planned. Private companies are investing too. Mining companies are developing new projects. Shipping companies are exploring Arctic routes. It's slow, it's expensive, but it's happening. Indigenous partnerships. Yukon's First Nations are increasingly involved in resource development. Modern land claim agreements give them a say in how development happens. This creates opportunities for partnerships that benefit both Indigenous communities and the broader economy. The shift is real. Yukon is transitioning from a forgotten frontier to a strategic gateway. But the question remains, can it actually capitalize on this opportunity? So let's come back to the question. Can Yukon reshape Canada's economy? The answer depends on whether geography's advantages can overcome geography's challenges. The advantages are clear: strategic position next to Alaska, within reach of the Bering Strait corridor between Asia and North America. Potential exposure to Arctic shipping shifts, still seasonal and uncertain but geopolitically meaningful. Mineral wealth including gold, silver, copper, zinc, and critical minerals. Border with Alaska, making it strategically important to US defense. Potential to support Arctic operations if infrastructure is built. Services, logistics, monitoring. But the challenges are real: population of just 47,500, too small to support major development alone. Extreme climate with temperatures dropping to -40 degrees Celsius. Infrastructure is thin for heavy industry. A limited set of main highway corridors, no rail connection into Canada's national network, and ocean access often depends on ports in Alaska. Yukon will never be a population center. The geography is too harsh, the climate too extreme, but it doesn't need to be. In the 21st century, strategic value isn't about population. It's about location, resources, and access. Yukon has all three. As Arctic shipping routes open, Yukon's location becomes more valuable. As demand for critical minerals increases, Yukon's deposits become more important. As geopolitical tensions rise in the Arctic, Yukon's strategic position becomes more critical. The territory generates about $3.53 billion in real GDP, 2023 inflation adjusted, with a population of roughly 45,500, about $78,000 per person. And that's before Arctic shipping scales in a meaningful way, before critical mineral demand accelerates further, before the full strategic value of Canada's Western Arctic edge is truly tested. Geography and climate kept Yukon remote for generations, but that same geography could make it one of the most strategically relevant territories in Canada as the Arctic becomes more navigable and more contested. The gateway is opening. The question is whether Canada is ready to build what it takes to walk through it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Will Yukon become Canada's Arctic gateway, or will infrastructure challenges keep it isolated?